We are mere weeks out from the day Jurassic World Rebirth will stomp across cinema screens worldwide, and the latest trailer has only promised more chills, more thrills, and more intrigue than the first. It was a tall order topping the terrible trio of Mosa-assisted Spinosaurs, but this latest peek into the Jurassic future has grabbed the attention of the net with 3 dinosaurs in particular. Today on Goje Center, we'll be diving into what we can find out about 3 deadly predators roaming the lands of this new island, with their abilities, history, and biology on full display before we get to see it on display terrorizing the human cast in a bid to put them 6 feet under. After all, on this island, survival is a long shot. To begin, let's start with the T-Rex. At first glance, this latest Tyrant Lizard King doesn't look too extremely different from the individuals we saw previously in the franchise. But on closer inspection, there are some subtle differences that might make all the difference on what separates this T-Rex from the other in-gen clones. Sporting a bulkier frame more in line with the true-to-life tyrant reptiles, this Tyrannosaurus might realistically be the heaviest one seen yet. We still don't know about the official stats for this individual, so some surprises could absolutely happen. But when put at the same length, it is noticeably wider and sports more soft tissue padding and muscle than even the 4 Tyrannosaurus we saw in the first trilogy, and Rexy when she bulked back up again for Dominion. Now, we did see a few folks pushing out the idea that this T-Rex is colossal, and we don't blame them. Our animation team, out of curiosity, placed our own 3D model of this new T-Rex and scaled it to proportion to this shot. While scaling a human taking into account the distance between the two, the result did indeed yield a T-Rex of outlandish proportions, more akin to the Super Rex we talked about in a previous video. Now, this is very likely an example of how the animators and VFX artists will increase the size of a creature to make a shot look good. A 42-foot-long T-Rex in this shot would actually look like this. So, much more likely than not, this T-Rex isn't a 23-meter Hollow Earth resident. However, it is noticeably more bulky and allegedly a bigger T-Rex than the originals. Add to the fact that it is mentioned that all the animals left behind on this island were too dangerous, and we could be looking at the most powerful T-Rex in the franchise, who, if given the chance, could level the playing field when it comes to determining who is really the most powerful theropod in this franchise. This added bulk might help out in another curious behavior this individual showed off, given we see this Rex pursuing the Delgado family past the water's edge and submarining their way down the river to pursue their raft. This kind of sequence famously was planned all the way back in the original movie, having been one of the first scenes storyboarded since it was probably one of the most famous action sequences out of the novel. However, there were concerns in production that the CGI wouldn't hold up well around the moving water, and there was a serious safety hazard if the liquids affected the animatronic. Sadly, this meant that the sequence had to be cut, though it would inspire the famous theme park ride where the Tyrannosaurus is the final threat, making a lunge for the raft in the finale. This scene was almost reincarnated in the Lost World video game before it got to appear in another form, where Stan Winston had years more experience to create the most powerful animatronic he had ever made in JP3's Spinosaurus, who finally got the job done. The third movie's river sequence makes perfect sense in hindsight, given the water-loving habits of the Saharan sailback. But what about this literally novel idea applied to a T-Rex? While tyrannosaurs weren't exactly prone to living in the water, the Hell Creek Formation did have ample floodplains, rivers, and coastal islands after all. We haven't seen any in the franchise taking to water quite like this outside of the novels. And not just swimming after or fishing for prey, but striding into the water to pace across the bottom. Denser-bodied animals have a lot easier of a time pulling off this maneuver, since most creatures are naturally buoyant and float in water. The thicker frame, combined with plenty of experience learning how to do this, might explain why this individual seems to be muscling in on something you would expect more out of a Spinosaur. Becoming adept in the water doesn't take a lot of adaptation. For example, skeletally, there isn't that much of a difference between a jaguar and a leopard. And yet the jaguar regularly jumps into the water to ambush prey and contend with other predators like crocodilians and anaconda. And a 2023 research paper did find that the body type of Tyrannosaurus would have been capable of running along the bottom of shallow water just fine. This might have even been a valid strategy to chase after shorter prey that couldn't wade as well, be it ambushing hadrosaurs near the river or chasing down a raft before it gets too close to deeper water where the even bigger predators roam. With this kind of build, prominent stripes, an appetite for trying to eat anyone of any age group, and a fondness for water, Rebirth's Tyrannosaurus seems to be taking some cues from Dr. Crichton's original novel. They may not have red scales and a grasping extendo tongue, but there is some similarity there all the same. Rexy's novel counterpart doggedly went after the humans multiple times. If her spiritual successor is following in those big footsteps, we hope this exciting waterside sequence isn't the only look we will get at this new Rex. The rest of the trailer gave us some new looks at the Titanosaurus, possibly sporting frills that can be extended or retracted if they didn't get a facelift. Some other shots of the overgrown sea lizard making us wonder if the new Mosasaurus is going to make the one from the prior trilogy look small. And seems like we got some dragons. Okay, so we at the channel also heard the hearsay about the winged raptors on some of the chatter leaking out about the upcoming movie, and frankly didn't know what to expect. After all, real-life raptors really did have wings, and plenty of them probably did use those wings for everything from balance to gliding, swimming, and yes, maybe even some amount of flight. This, however, was something we were simultaneously expecting and surprised about. Put some guy in plate armor with a longsword next to these things, and you'd think we were talking about a movie involving wyverns. Ignoring the jokes about Dr. Wu apparently having access to Westeros, these newcomers are supposedly called Mutadon, based on a label we see in the trailer. The name sounds very on brand with Gareth Edward, Mutos, and this time around it seems like somebody rolled up the threats of a dromaeosaur and a pterosaur into one package. Might these creatures be the shot of raptor feet we saw in the first trailer? It's possible, but doesn't seem to be the case unless they changed the CGI. This CinemaCon poster starring Johansson's character Zora faced with a raptor-like foot has our attention. However, the visible sores and unusually long, thin toes and claws on this limb don't match up to the classic-styled raptors. And given Zora is the character menaced by the Mutadons the most in the trailer, it's fair to say this sickly foot belongs to one of these unstable hybrids. We know from expensive merchandise and character art that raptors of some form, more closely resembling the variety from the third movie, are going to be in the film somewhere. So, more classic-style raptors might appear in the movie, possibly even squaring off with their mutant counterparts on screen, or in the next Evolution video game. Still, attacking the cast inside abandoned ruins is definitely bringing a lot of memories involving what went down on Site B in 1997 to mind. Perhaps someone thought the type of animal numerous groups would try to make into trained attack beasts needed some vertical superiority. Sporting a raptor-like hand with at least 2 fingers and a third swiveled back, these new flesh-eaters would still be able to grapple, stab, and rend almost as well as any raptor. But once that extended finger swivels out, long pointed wings like nothing seen in any dinosaur are on full display. The closest anything out of Dinosauria to this would be the tiny bird relative with bat-like wings, Yi Chi. But tiny, these things are clearly not. Assuming the role they are meant to play, and comparing them to that door we see this one standing in front of, the Mutadon seems to be slightly shorter than the scaly Deinonychus-like raptor most of us are more familiar with. It could still be that they are the same size or even bigger than the classic raptors, but this smaller size might help them leverage the other half of their genome better with less weight. So, why would less weight be handy in this situation? Well,
some DIY projects are a good idea, like growing a garden, but a do-it-yourself disability claim?
while it is true that some surprises could be in store, especially to pick a more marketable-sounding species in a movie that's supposedly retitled Argentinosaurus to Titanosaurus, and a pterosaur literally named Death Dragon, Thanatos Draken to Quetzalcoatlus, the anatomy of this hybrid does remind us of a Jurassic species most of the scriptwriters would have been familiar with, had they cracked open a book on pterosaurs in the decades before animals like the cats or dimorphs became household names. Rhamphorhynchus was a seagull-sized pterosaur found in abundance across Europe. One of the very first pterosaurs ever well understood, the pointed wings, long tail, and combination hooked beak and jagged teeth definitely remind us of this hybrid. There is another possibility, given this latest outing seems to be taking some cues from the late Crichton's novels. In the original novel, as Dr. Grant and the kids are making their way across the park, they come upon a secret area not previously talked about. There, they run afoul of a foul flock of fowl when a Pterodactylus goes on the attack. Cut from the film, but appearing in tie-in media from the first to the last outing, Pterodactylus does still have the pointed beak and prominent teeth the mutant seems to sport. Realistically, however, could something like this actually exist? Could it fly or only glide? The answer might be more of a gradient than a firm yes or no. Raptors are among the dinosaurs closest to birds, and given some of the most primitive raptors, like Microraptor, spent plenty of time in forests and near tall trees, and seems to have wings big enough for some amount of flight, it's possible raptors might have all had that ability when they started out as younglings. Heavyweights like Utah Raptor certainly couldn't do more than glide, but even man-sized species like Deinonychus very well might have spent time up in the trees. Now, this isn't to say they were soaring through the skies, but flight-boosted jumps to get up off the ground and gliding pounces from the treetops are entirely possible. Feathery wings might not work quite the same way as pterosaur wings, but there could be some congruency there. One of the biggest hurdles would be literally taking the hurdle to get off the ground, however. One of the reasons pterosaurs could grow to such a huge size and still fly easily was because they were actually quadrupeds. Able to use their arms as their biggest set of legs, this meant adding more muscle and bone mass to their upper body for a better vault, and takeoff also meant giving them bigger and stronger flight muscles to keep airborne. Birds, as theropod dinosaurs, however, are more or less locked into being bipeds. With maybe one or two exceptions, theropods just aren't built to hold up their own weight with their arms. For flying theropods, however, this means that the set of limbs they need to use to run to get a kickstart for flight are not the same limbs they're going to be flying with. Adding more weight to the legs for a stronger takeoff and jump just means more weight to carry around while flying. Add in a long tail that's going to produce a lot of drag, and something shaped like these hybrids probably would have a much harder time staying airborne than a pterosaur of the same size. If this raptor was indeed capable of flight, it should more or less be shaped like this. Wider chest and more wing surface area to create enough downward force to push the raptor upwards. Shorter, less heavier legs, and a shorter tail. We do think, however, that these things will be able to at least glide a good distance. No point in adding wings to these animals if they aren't going to be showcased gliding from point A to point B. Still, regardless of if they can only glide, fly in short bursts, or take to the skies, we're happy to see the carnivore carnage coming in all matters of scale this time around. And speaking of mutants, we got a bit of new insight on the D-Rex, and we also know its full name, Distortus Rex. Of all the terrors in the new trailer, it is still impressive that it is the D-Rex that continues to steal the show. Previously on the channel, we analyzed what little we had to go off of for this monstrous mutant, and we were happy to see a good chunk of the speculations we had held up pretty well. While we still don't have a full body shot on screen, early release merchandise and a more complete picture from the trailer does give us more to work off of. Seemingly lighter in color than we thought initially, the Distortus Rex, the distorted or malformed king, has all the bulk we would expect for a hybrid mutant that is carrying an ample amount of Tyrannosaurus in the genome. Alongside bulking up the model, it seems like the hybrid might alternate its stance every now and then. The first trailer showed off a moment of it knuckle-walking like a great ape, but some of the recently released toy images seem to show it walking on its palms more like monkeys. This doesn't mean it necessarily has both, it just shows it has quite dexterous hands to be able to switch back and forth. That same dexterity certainly came to ruin this guy's day when he seems to be the latest in the long line of people having bad luck with doors in Gareth Edward movies. Yeah, the way this dude begs for his life is a bit unsettling, foreshadowing that Distortus will be up to no good in the rest of the movie. Notice how before they probably sent this unlucky bastard to meet their maker, the D-Rex seems to curiously paw at and manipulate the man. This is the kind of behavior you see in inquisitive, intelligent predators, especially when they first encounter something they hadn't seen up close in a long time. Watch a tiger in a zoo with a new toy, and you'll see the same thing. Considering early reporting from Empire Magazine indicates that this creature was probably created sometime in between the third and fourth movie, it being a hybrid on top of a mutation makes a lot of sense. What exactly is in there, however, we can still only speculate about until we have some official listings. But given how cognizant it seems to be in the trailer, some intelligent animals with long limbs like primates may not be out of the ballpark. Will the fourth Jurassic World film take the same plunge the fourth Jurassic Park film nearly did, and have human DNA in this antagonist as some kind of spiritual successor to the Tyrannosapiens? Who can say? What we can say, however, is we were right to speculate that this abomination is absolutely gigantic. Now, we would like to remind everybody that figuring out exact size from a CGI model is going to be tricky. There are some shots in this very trailer that make the new Tyrannosaurus look like they might be twice as big as the previous versions, but there are also plenty that make it seem closer in size to the likes of Rexy, the Doe, and the Buck. Still, the shots we see here does support the Distorted King potentially taking the new crown of the largest terrestrial predator in the franchise after all, at potentially over 6 to 7.6 meters, or 20 to 25 feet tall. We are eagerly awaiting some more official listings on how grand this Goliath is supposed to be, so stay tuned as we do the same thing. Want to see more coverage of the new movie after its big release? Care for a combat evaluation of these new terrors and older beasts of the franchise? Subscribe. Or D-Rex will give you a wedgie.